We all want the protests to end and these Canadians to feel like they've been heard and respected. I've asked the Prime Minister to meet with me and the other opposition leaders in good faith to try to find a way forward from this impasse.
The Conservative Party of Canada has spent the last 2 weeks endorsing and enabling these blockades across the country. The leader of the Conservative Party and her team have been their biggest champions, even promoting their fundraising.
The convoy remains rooted in downtown Ottawa with little progress made to remove them. It is now also blocking key infrastructure sites, including the critical Ambassador Bridge that joins Windsor and Detroit. That has prompted the Conservatives to now call for the protesters to leave while still pointing fingers at the federal government. It's Thursday. I'm here with that issue. Chantal Hebert, Althia and Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Andrew is away tonight. Chantal, what is your assessment right now of how Ottawa has handled this week?
Not so great. Vacuum in leadership. There was a time, I watched the question period on Wednesday when the Prime Minister was taking all the questions, and I wondered if he was the leader of the opposition. I understand the temptation to lash out at Conservatives for having supported this early on, but at the end of the day, he is the Prime Minister, and you would have expected more information about an exit strategy from the Prime Minister of a country whose borders are being shut down by protests and less accusations against the Conservatives for whatever they did.
And it was sort of, those questions I think became more prominent when we saw Joel Lightbound say that he wasn't in agreement with his own government's position. Althia, how are you reading things?
I'd separate the two, frankly. I think Joel Lightbound, the Quebec City area MP's comments were twofold. One on the lockdowns where he kind of mixed up provincial jurisdiction and federal jurisdiction. And the other one, which I think was much more biting, was on a condemnation of the Prime Minister's own divisive rhetoric. And the PMO is very concerned with some of the Prime Minister's words, and I think wishes that Justin Trudeau could swallow them back in, suggesting that some of the protesters during the election campaign were, he described them as often racist, often misogynistic. He would have liked to take those back because every time we write about it, we get a call from the PMO saying, you know, that was just about the protesters. But he can't seem to help himself. You know, he called them the small fringe minority with the tinfoil hats. And I think that Joel Lightbound was right to say that that language has not contributed to bringing more people who were on the fence about getting vaccinated into the vaccinated camp, that it has further divided people and pushed them towards a segment of the population where you're kind of wondering how to bring them back to the mainstream. And those comments actually echoed some of the comments that he'd given during the Quebec mosque shooting. I thought very thoughtful and profound about realizing that you can't paint people with one identity and the divisions that helps create. So I think is different. I think I'm in total agreement with Chantal. The jurisdictional buck passing, the power vacuum is shocking. I think we're a laughingstock internationally. I know politicians do not want to wear this. Justin Trudeau does not want to call in the army. Seems like Doug Ford does not want the OPP to go in, and he has to explain what he's doing and why. But you know, at some point, somebody needs to take action, and both of these men should be doing their job.
Elamin.
I mean, I think the idea of bringing back people to the mainstream, that ship seems to have sailed at this point. Sure, the protesters don't have that broad support. The unvaccinated in this country are not the majority. They're a very tiny minority. But at the same time, we have completely left behind the Justin Trudeau who's interested in speaking to that minority. And for that matter, any politician who's interested in speaking to that minority. And I think there used to be a time, maybe in this country, where if you wanted to govern the whole country, you would try to at least, you know, put on the impression that you're trying to speak to the whole country. But it feels as though the Prime Minister has kind of given up on trying to reach those people and started using them as a political wedge. I think that much is definitely clear. It's just a matter of, at this point, what do you do with that? Because certainly the rhetoric is inflamed. Those protesters are inflamed. Are any of their actions acceptable? Certainly not. But I don't know what you do. I don't know what you do to bring this country back together at this point.
Chantal, is that actually a risk, though, for all the reasons that Elamin laid out there, that the vast majority of people don't identify necessarily with what's happening?
Yes, but that is the problem Joel Lightbound put forward in a very straight way. It is totally possible to not agree with anything that's happening with this convoy and still think the Prime Minister is not doing his job and is failing to read the room and increasingly failing to read his own caucus room, in the sense that provinces have had to adjust, mine as a case in point, but it's not the only one, to not only changing circumstances, but a changing public mood. And the Prime Minister seems frozen in space on his talking points. He's not going to win that debate with many Canadians on talking points. And I'm not talking about the people who are in the convoy, because the instinct of this government, or at least this Prime Minister, has been to double down. We're just going to put it in your face and do more of it. But a lot of people out there who are not going to be demonstrating are saying, wait a minute, provinces are putting out timetables for doing away with restrictions, but the federal government would just tell you, don't call us, we'll call you when we decide to do something about this. And on some of the measures that the federal government is in charge of, travel restrictions at the border, even the mandate for truckers, it is far from clear that it is based on saving lives as the talking points talks about.
Althia, you've got like 25 seconds.
Not just saving lives, it's like the science, right? Like the government could do what the opposition has long been called for, frankly, and explain to Canadians. I think it would do a great deal to have the trust build how we're going to get out of this pandemic, what the benchmarks are for, and this speaks to provincial and federal as well, in order to allow for a softening. I think that would bring more people on side to their plans, whether you are opposed to mandates or in favor of mandates. At least people know what the framework is for seeing the end.
We're confident as we move ahead with this phased approach that we are going to take these steps back to normal by reducing and eliminating the public health orders that are in place.
Saskatchewan, just one of two provinces to announce rather abrupt ends to some COVID restrictions this week, moving to end the use of vaccine passports and indoor mask mandates. Alberta announced similar measures, different rollout. Some of those moves happened within hours of the announcements. So what does it signal? Is it the right time, considering the political climate too? At issue is back, Chantal, Althia, and Elamin. I'll start with you on this, Elamin. When we put a lot of these measures in place, one of the things that governments did, I think to our point before, was explain why they were needed in order to get public buy-in. And now it seems they're undoing them almost for the same reason. And I wonder what we think about how and why politicians are making these decisions.
It seems the buy-in for health reasons has gone out the window, and now we're sort of in an entirely different realm, which is the use of these mandates as a political tool. It's sort of like, there are places where to keep the mandates will win you points, and there are places where to undo them will win you points. And we have entered this era of the sort of relationship to these mandates. But the thing that's unfortunate about that is that it feels like we have lost trust in the authorities to at least communicate to us why they're bringing us along with these decisions. This, as you mentioned just like a second ago, it feels very abrupt. I think there are certainly, cases where we have done this sort of phased approach in terms of peeling back the restrictions. This is a pretty abrupt jump to saying, okay, we're going to do away with vaccine passports altogether, which certainly for the people who have used that as a safety blanket over the last, year and a half or so, this will feel like a big blow. But certainly it's politically motivating. Is just that it feels unfortunate that we've entered this stage where it is a political tool to sort of play with these mandates depending on your allegiances.
Chantal.
But it was always a mix. And once people will not buy into what you're telling them to do, as we've seen with the latest curfew in Quebec, then you are losing the battle. It is also true, Alberta and Saskatchewan are going about it abruptly. Yeah. But that is the trend, and that is where this is going, and that is where the public will also go. And there is at least some amount of evidence on the health side that suggests that that may be the way to go. Either because it's unsustainable, but also because possibly the Omicron wave, as brutal as it was, has demonstrated that it is possible to go there. So I'm not seeing this as merely a political move. But I am seeing this in the case of Alberta, Saskatchewan, as a move to a public opinion that is probably different from Ontario's and Quebec's public opinion on this.
Yeah, for sure. Althia.
Yes, public opinion in Saskatchewan and Alberta is definitely different than public opinion in Ontario on this. I think there is a sense that, and there's a fear from some in the healthcare community and the opposition in those provinces that the government is moving too quickly. And that also means that if circumstances change, once the public is, freed of their masks and freed of the vaccine requirements, the passports, that it's much harder to bring it back if you need to. If there's another variant that comes and the healthcare situation changes once you've unshackled everybody and said, spring has arrived, that you are going to lose buy-in. And unless you explain to people why you're doing the decisions that you are doing, to like the previous segment, I agree, there's a crisis in trust. I think trust is what has been explored this week, frankly, I think is the theme, lack of trust everywhere. It's really sad to see.
Last word to you, Chantal. You want it.
But we did vaccine mandates to convince people to get vaccinated. There is a point, and I listened to question period today, and the question I thought was relevant is the point where we start giving people who are vaccinated a life that is more normal. Does it have to be 100% vaccinated? Because if that's the case, that's never going to happen.
Okay, I fear I think we will probably still be talking about all of this next week with the protests. There seems to be a little movement. Thank you all very much.